Welcome back to Chess 369. If you think the bishop's opening is simple or harmless, today's video is going to completely change that. You're about to discover a devastating attacking weapon that punishes black's most common responses, and many strong players fall for these traps without even realizing it. In this breakdown, I'll show you the exact moves, the hidden ideas, and the tactical shots that can help you win a full piece, launch a crushing attack, or even finish the game in just 7 moves. This is not just theory. These are practical patterns you can use against real opponents right away. So stay with me until the end, because every step of this line connects to the next, and missing one detail can mean losing the entire combo. And if you're new here, or you enjoy content that makes you a stronger, smarter, and more confident player, make sure to subscribe to Chess 369 and hit the like button. It supports the channel and helps me bring you even more high-impact chess lessons. Let's jump straight into it. The bishop's opening begins with the moves pawn to e4, pawn to e5, bishop to c4. In most cases, your opponent will respond with knight to f6, naturally developing their knight and attacking your central pawn on e4. Instead of defending passively, we counterattack immediately with pawn to d4. At this point, your opponent is at a critical decision point. They can either capture the pawn on e4 or the pawn on d4. However, one of these captures is a significant mistake that could put them in danger of losing the game within the few moves. Can you guess which move is incorrect? It's not as obvious as it seems, which works in our favor, since opponents frequently choose the wrong option. The mistake is knight takes pawn on e4. Why is this a blunder? After you recapture the pawn with pawn takes pawn on e5, the knight on e4 becomes vulnerable. It is isolated from the rest of your opponent's forces, and your pawn on a5 effectively controls the squares d6 and f6, preventing the knight from retreating. This allows you to attack and capture the knight in a variety of ways in the following moves. Another interesting aspect of this position is that the two most common and tempting moves played by black, bishop to ci5 and pawn to d5, are both major mistakes and lead to an immediate disaster for black. Let's first examine pawn to d5. Black's idea with pawn to d5 is to solidify their knight on e4 while attacking your bishop on c4. On the surface, this looks reasonable, but there is a crucial detail they have overlooked: the presence of your queen on d1. This makes their move a blunder. You can simply capture the pawn with bishop takes pawn on d5. Your bishop is defended, so black cannot recapture it without losing their queen on d8. As a result, black has just sacrificed a pawn for no compensation. Moreover, after you capture the pawn, your bishop also attacks the knight on e4. When the knight retreats, your attack continues with a stunning follow-up: bishop takes pawn on f7. This is a sacrifice of your light-squared bishop to set up a decisive attack. So if black captures your bishop with their king, they immediately lose their queen on d8, leaving you with a winning advantage. Black has no good options at this point. If they attempt to play king to a7 to defend the queen, you can continue with bishop to g5, pinning the queen to the king. This ensures you win the queen regardless of black's response. This demonstrates how you can defeat even strong players within just 7 moves, which is absolutely phenomenal. Another tempting option for black, and also the most commonly played move, is bishop to c5. Black hopes to pressure your pawn on f2, thinking this will help launch an attack. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, this move helps you strengthen your attack. Not only is their knight on e4 vulnerable, but now their bishop on c5 is also undefended. There are even 2 ways to exploit this position. The most powerful move is queen to d5, which simultaneously threatens checkmate on f7 and attacks the bishop on c5. If black captures the pawn on f2 with bishop takes pawn on f2, you'll have to move your king. However, on the next move, you'll win one of their minor pieces and achieve a material advantage, putting you in a clearly winning position. The slight inconvenience is that your king is forced to move, but this does not diminish your overall advantage. With that in mind, I believe there's an even more practical way to win in this position. Instead of immediately playing queen to d5, you can first make an intermediate move with bishop takes pawn on f7, forcing the king to recapture. Once the king king captures the bishop, you follow up with queen to d5. The idea is the same, but the move order is reversed. Now you deliver a double attack on both the king and the knight on e4. Since the king must move, you can then capture the knight with queen takes knight on e4, leaving you in a winning position. The beauty of the situation lies in its simplicity. Not only are you up a pawn, but it's a critical pawn, the one that no longer shields the enemy king, leaving it exposed. Even more importantly, the opponent's king has already moved, meaning it can no longer castle. It is now stuck in the center of the board, obstructing their development. This makes it incredibly difficult for your opponent to coordinate their pieces, while you can simply continue developing yours. For example, you can develop your knights, play bishop to g5 to pin their pieces, bring your rook into play, and castle safely. Additionally, if black ever tries to advance their pawn for counterplay, they often fall victim to a discovered check from your queen. This leaves your opponent with no good options, and you can secure victory with straightforward moves. That's why I consider this approach the most reliable and guaranteed way to win the game. Now that we've covered the common response of black's knight capturing the central pawn on e4, let's discuss the correct move. Pawn takes pawn on d4. In this case, recapturing the pawn immediately. You should play knight to f3, prioritizing quick development and preparing for an aggressive attack, something we always aim for in gambit play. At this point, many opponents will choose to capture your pawn on e4. Why? Because leaving it on the board can be uncomfortable for black. You can eventually push it forward with pawn to e5, chasing away their knight, or simply recapture the pawn on d4 later. Since you already have multiple attackers targeting the pawn on d4, it feels unsafe for your opponent. As a result, they often decide to take your pawn on e4, thinking there's no immediate danger. After queen takes pawn on d4, your queen enters the game early, but in a strong and active position. From here, you're set to launch a powerful attack. Taking advantage of black's vulnerable setup, you attack the knight, forcing it to retreat. Let's say black plays knight to f6. After this, you continue with knight to c3. Although black is up a pawn, what does black do next? Naturally, they notice your queen is exposed and try to exploit this by playing knight to c6, hoping to gain a tempo. However, this doesn't bother us at all. Instead of losing momentum, you simply reposition your queen to the highly active square h4. From queen to h4, your queen exerts pressure along both the h-file and the diagonal, which will be especially effective once your opponent castles kingside, as we anticipate. This positioning makes your queen a long-term threat. At this point, your opponent may feel confident in their position and continue developing with bishop to e7, assuming that your queen's activity is premature and can be neutralized. However, this assumption is far from the truth. You respond with bishop to g5, increasing pressure along the diagonal and targeting black's pinned knight on f6. Eventually, your opponent may feel compelled to play pawn to h6 to alleviate the pressure. This move is understandable, but ultimately a mistake. The pawn move does nothing to address the real threats, and the bishop on g5 remains untouchable due to the pin on the rook at h8. You can calmly ignore the threat and proceed with castling queenside. By castling queenside, you not only safeguard your king, but also activate your rook, placing it on the open d-file where it can join the attack. At this point, black realizes they cannot capture your bishop on g5 because their rook on h8 is pinned. Instead, they aim to castle kingside, hoping to attack your bishop and force you to retreat or trade. However, we don't back down or trade. We sacrifice the bishop instead, with bishop takes pawn on f6, completely exposing black's king. After this trade, black's king is left wide open. And let's not forget that most of their pieces remain undeveloped and inactive. In the following moves, you can play knight to g5, followed by bishop to d3, setting up a devastating attack. From there, you can aim to deliver checkmate on h7 with your queen and other active pieces. One common mistake black might make in this position is playing knight to g4, hoping to force your queen to retreat. But we never play passively or follow black's expectations. Instead, you respond with the bold move queen to g6, taking advantage of the fact that the pawn on f7 is pinned and cannot capture your queen. Now black is forced to move their king, leaving the knight on g4 undefended. You can then capture the knight with queen takes knight on g4, gaining extra material while keeping the king completely exposed. In response to the overwhelming attack, black may attempt knight to h7, which is a slightly better defense, but still fails to save the game. Black's goal is to cover their queen and prepare for counterplay, possibly hoping to complicate the position. For example, they might anticipate bishop to g5 check, looking to trade some material. If you play knight takes bishop, they plan to recapture with the queen, hoping to stabilize the position. However, we shut down their hopes immediately with the brilliant move rook to d5. This move controls the critical square d5, preventing black's pieces from using it for counterplay. After rook to d5, black is essentially out of useful moves. If they play something like pawn to d6 to develop or gain space, you continue with the stunning move rook to h5. Suddenly, black's position becomes defenseless. On the next move, you deliver checkmate with either queen to h7 or queen to h8, sealing the game in a decisive and stylish manner. And that's the full power of this attacking system in the bishop's opening. When played correctly, it exposes black's weaknesses, punishes their natural moves, and gives you a dominant position right out of the opening. Now you understand not just the traps, but the logic behind them, so you can apply this system confidently in your own games. If this video helped you improve, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Chess369 for more practical guides, opening tricks, and deep breakdowns that actually make you a stronger player. Tell me in the comments which opening or idea you want me to cover next. I always read your suggestions and choose future videos based on them. Thanks for watching.